Something major has changed at the US FDA. For decades, drug approvals required two trials. Now, in certain cases, one strong trial may be enough. AI based medical software is moving through regulatory pathways faster, but under stricter algorithm scrutiny. Inspections are becoming digital, risk based, and data driven. So, friends, let me ask you, if your company submitted a dossier to the FDA tomorrow, are you really fully aligned with 2026 expectations? Because regulatory science is evolving, not cosmetically, but structurally. Hi, I am Rajesh Kapoor, founder of PharmaHealth Insights, with over 28 years of experience in pharmaceutical manufacturing, regulatory compliance, and global quality systems. In today's session, I will break down the latest US FDA guidelines updates in a practical and strategic way, not just what changed, but what it means for pharma, biotech, medical devices, and global exporters. So, let's begin. But wait, what exactly is an FDA guidance? Is it law or just a recommendation? Now, before we go deeper into drug approvals and AI regulations, let me ask you something. When you hear the word FDA guidance, what do you exactly think it means? Is it a law? Is it mandatory? Or is it just a recommendation that companies can ignore? Because this misunderstanding creates huge compliance mistakes. Many professionals assume that if guidance is not legally binding, it can be taken lightly. But here's the reality. During inspections and submissions, guidance becomes the benchmark. So before we discuss the big regulatory shifts of 2026, we must clearly understand what guidance really means in practical regulatory life. Now that we understand what FDA guidance really means in practice, let's move to the update that has created the most discussion in regulatory circles. And I want you to think carefully about this. For decades, how many trials were typically required for approval? Two. Yes, two independent, adequate, well controlled clinical trials. That was the gold standard, but 2026 introduces flexibility, and this is where the things get really interesting. Historically, two independent, adequate, and well controlled clinical trials were considered the gold standard for new drug approvals. Now you'll ask me, why two? Because regulators wanted reproducibility. If one study shows efficacy, the second study had to confirm it. The idea was simple. One positive result could be a coincidence, but two consistent results built confidence. That was the foundation of regulatory science for decades. However, regulatory science has evolved. Today, the FDA recognizes that one well designed, statistically powerful, multi center, randomized controlled trial, if properly supported, can demonstrate substantial evidence of effectiveness. But here's the key question: supported by what? This is where the totality of evidence approach comes in. It may include pharmacodynamic biomarkers, exposure response modeling, real world experience, mechanistic plausibility, even external control arms. So, the shift is not about lowering standard, it's about strengthening the scientific foundation behind a single high quality study. We have discussed the shift towards single trial, but flexibility doesn't mean simplicity. So, the key question now is, what actually makes one trial acceptable? Let's go into the technical criteria. For regulatory professionals, this is where things become really critical. One trial must clearly demonstrate statistical robustness, meaning adequate sample size and pre specified endpoints, proper alpha control, especially in adaptive designs to prevent inflation of type 1 error, independent data monitoring committees ensuring unbiased safety oversight, subgroup consistency. Regulators will carefully assess variability across age, gender, ethnicity, and other demographics, and an adequate safety database, particularly for drugs intended for long term or chronic use. So the message is very clear: quality replaces quantity. So once the statistical and safety expectations are satisfied, the next layer becomes important because one trial alone is rarely evaluated in isolation. The FDA looks at the bigger picture. Let's now understand how supportive evidence strengthens a single study. Another important component in this evolving framework is real world evidence. FDA is increasingly incorporating real world data into regulatory evaluation. But let's be very clear, not all data qualifies. The data must meet strict reliability standards. That means data source validation, bias mitigation, proper control of missing data, and statistical adjustment for confounders. FDA expects full transparency in methodology, how the data was collected, analyzed, and interpreted. And when approvals rely on limited pre approval data sets, post marketing surveillance obligations often increase, which means global pharmacovigilance systems become even more critical. Real world evidence is powerful, but only when it is scientifically defensible. So far, we have been discussing how the drugs are evaluated, but regulation in 2026 is not only about molecules, it's also about machines, artificial intelligence, software driven diagnostics, remote monitoring systems. These are no longer futuristic concepts, they are entering regulatory review today. Let's now move into how the FDA is approaching the digital health and the AI revolution. Digital health is no longer an emerging concept, it is actively transforming medicine. AI driven diagnostic tools, radiology interpretation softwares, wearable cardiac monitors, all of these now fall under FDA device regulation. So the question is not whether the AI is regulated, the question is how. For AI and machine learning systems, the FDA expects a clear description of the training dataset, bias analysis across different demographic groups, predetermined change control plans, validation against established clinical standards, and ongoing real world performance monitoring. Now, here's it becomes more complex. Continuous learning algorithms cannot evolve freely after approval. They require predefined modification frameworks that regulators have already evaluated, which means regulatory strategy cannot be an afterthought. It must be embedded into the product development right from the day one. We have just discussed how AI and digital technologies are entering regulatory pathways, but innovation alone is not enough. Behind every approved device or software system, there must be a strong quality framework. Because no matter how advanced the technology is, compliance is built on systems. Let's now look at how the FDA is modernizing the quality management system regulation. The FDA's update to the Quality Management System Regulation or QMSR is a structural shift, especially for medical device manufacturers. The major change? Its alignment with ISO 13485. This brings stronger global harmonization between US and international quality standards. But alignment does not mean relaxation. In fact, lifecycle risk management is now even more emphasized. Risk is not something you document once during design and forget. It must be continuously evaluated from design inputs to post market feedback. Design controls are under sharper scrutiny now. Supplier qualification and outsourced manufacturing oversight are becoming critical inspection focus areas. And CAPA systems must demonstrate effectiveness, not just closure. So the message is clear. A compliant product starts with a compliant system, and QMS modernization means your quality framework must be proactive, integrated, and inspection ready at all times. We have discussed clinical strategy, AI regulation, and quality system modernization. But ultimately, all of this is tested in one place, inspection. Because no matter how strong your submission looks on paper, compliance is verified on site or increasingly online. Let's look at how FDA inspections themselves are evolving. FDA inspections are no longer limited to traditional physical walkthroughs. They are becoming smarter, data driven, and risk based. Facility selection is increasingly guided by risk signals such as past compliance history, adverse event trends, recalls, or data inconsistencies. Remote interactive evaluations are now part of regulatory reality. Facilities may be asked to share live video walkthroughs, electronic batch records, or digital documentation remotely. This means your documentation system must be inspection ready at all times, not just when the inspector arrives at your gate. Data integrity remains the top enforcement priority. Inspectors are reviewing audit trails, user access control, metadata, electronic record consistency, and backup validation practices. And cybersecurity is no longer just an IT responsibility. If electronic systems are vulnerable, it becomes a compliance issue. So, inspection modernization is clear. Regulators are becoming more analytical, more digital, and more risk focused, and companies must respond with the same level of maturity. So far, we have focused on drugs, devices, AI systems, and inspections. But regulation in 2026 is also strongly influenced by a global public health priority, that is, antimicrobial resistance. Because regulatory science is not only about approvals, it's about protecting long term public health. Antimicrobial resistance is now considered one of the most serious global health threats, and regulators worldwide, including the FDA, are tightening oversight on antibiotic usage, especially in food producing animals. The updated guidance focuses on restricting prolonged or inappropriate antibiotic use. It emphasizes veterinary prescription oversight, clear labeling, and defined treatment durations. But this is not just a veterinary issue, it affects pharmaceutical manufacturers, agricultural producers, exporters, and global supply chains. Companies must ensure that duration of use is scientifically justified, labeling aligns with updated guidance, distribution controls are properly documented, and surveillance systems monitor resistance trends. Because misuse of antibiotics today creates resistance problems tomorrow. So, this guidance reflects something larger. Regulatory science is aligning more closely with global public health strategy, and compliance in this area is not just about passing inspections, it's about long term sustainability. Closely connected to antimicrobial oversight is another major regulatory priority: food safety modernization. Because protecting public health doesn't stop at pharmaceuticals, it extends across the entire supply chain. Let's now look at the FDA's Human Food Program priorities for the year 2026. The FDA's Human Foods Program in 2026 is clearly moving towards a prevention first model. The emphasis is on proactive risk control rather than reactive enforcement. Supply chain traceability is becoming central. Companies must be able to trace products quickly, from raw material sourcing to finished distribution, because in the event of contamination, response time directly impacts public safety. Import surveillance is also increasing, especially for high risk food categories. Exporters to the US market must ensure documentation is accurate, accessible, and inspection ready. Hazard analysis and preventive control documentation will receive deeper scrutiny. Regulators want to see not just procedures but scientifically justified risk assessment. The overall direction is clear. Food safety is becoming more digital, more traceable, and more accountability driven, and companies operating in the US market must align their systems accordingly. When we look at all these updates together, clinical flexibility, AI oversight, QMS modernization, inspection digitization, food safety priorities, a larger pattern starts to appear. These are not isolated changes, they reflect a broader movement in global regulatory science. Let's step back and look at the global perspective. The FDA does not operate in isolation. Through ICH harmonization and international collaboration, regulatory standards across major markets are gradually aligning. While agencies like the EMA and other global regulators maintain independent frameworks, convergence in quality, safety, and efficacy expectations is increasing. When FDA modernizes its approach, other regulators observe closely. Mutual recognition agreements and cross border inspection collaborations are expanding. This means companies can no longer treat compliance as region specific. A regulatory decision in one major market increasingly influences global submission strategy. Regulatory intelligence is becoming a strategic advantage. Monitoring draft guidance, enforcement trends, advisory committee discussions, and inspection findings allow companies to anticipate direction rather than react after the publication. The bigger message is clear: regulation is becoming more interconnected, more harmonized, and more globally synchronized. And companies that understand this convergence will be better positioned for international success. So, after understanding all these regulatory shifts, the most important question becomes, what should companies actually do now? Because awareness alone is not strategy, alignment is. Based on the 2026 FDA updates, companies need a structured response. First, conduct a comprehensive regulatory gap assessment. Compare your current clinical, quality, and digital systems against emerging expectations. Second, strengthen your clinical data governance. With increased flexibility in trial design, statistical rigor and documentation must be stronger than ever. Third, upgrade digital infrastructure. Inspection readiness now depends heavily on electronic records, audit trails, cybersecurity safeguards, and system validation. Fourth, embed regulatory thinking into product development, especially for AI and software driven technologies. Compliance cannot be added later, it must be designed in from the beginning. And finally, invest in continuous regulatory training. Regulation is evolving faster than before. Teams across QA, RA, clinical, IT, and operations must stay aligned because in 2026, regulatory excellence is not just about avoiding warning letters, it's about building competitive advantage. We have discussed the technical updates, the strategic implications, and the operational responses required in 2026. But before we conclude, let's step back for a while because beyond individual guidelines and inspection trends, there is a bigger regulatory direction emerging. Let's look at the final perspective. So, friends, when we step back and look at all these developments together, one message becomes very clear. The FDA is not relaxing standards, it is modernizing regulatory science. Flexibility in single trials does not mean reduced scrutiny, it means stronger statistical accountability. AI integration does not mean faster shortcuts, it means structured algorithm governance. Inspection modernization does not mean fewer inspection, it means smarter data driven oversight. And global convergence does not reduce compliance burden, it raises expectations across markets. So, the real takeaway from 2026 is this: regulation is becoming more scientific, more digital, and more interconnected. And the organizations that adapt early, not react late, will lead. If you are a regulatory professional, quality leader, clinical strategist, or digital health innovator, this is the time to strengthen your systems because regulatory excellence is no longer a support function, it is a strategic differentiator. Let's stay ahead. Make sure you subscribe to Pharma Health Insights so you don't miss upcoming regulatory intelligence sessions. Also, share this video with your QA, RA, or clinical colleagues. Regulatory awareness should never remain isolated with one department. Thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next session.